أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف خلق الله سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين وصحبه الأخيار المنتجبين وعلى جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ما بعد يقول الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هاتوا برهانكم إن كنتم صادقين. Say, bring your evidence if you were truthful. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات. In tonight's talk, I thought to speak a little bit about Lady Fatima alayhi salam and the events that took place during her last days in this world. Obviously, as we are commemorating her Shahada, there's a few narrations, as you know. Inshallah, we'll be commemorating the Shahada of Lady Fatima here in the mosque in a couple of weeks' time. Before I discuss my talk for tonight, let me start with an introduction. In our interactions with people around us, with people who are different from us, in our interactions with people who follow a different school of Islam, or people from different faiths, or people from different communities, people who believe different things than what we believe. Obviously, these differences might rise to disagreements. We might disagree with other people, disagree on what is right and what is wrong, and who was right and who was wrong, what is right to believe, what is not right to believe, whom to follow, whom not to follow. And generally, we have two approaches towards these kinds of differences. One approach is that we hate each other, is that we slander each other, is that we curse each other, we fight each other. Another approach is that no, we acknowledge this difference and we try to manage it, we try to navigate it. Not disregard it, no, acknowledge that there is a difference, but try to navigate it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran taught us in so many principles how to navigate differences. Dialogue, discussion, right? These are some ways. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, told us don't, for example, insult other people's beliefs. Allah in the Quran says in chapter 6, verse 108, وَلَا تَسُبُّوا الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّوا اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. O believers, and do not insult what they invoke besides God, or they will insult God spitefully out of ignorance. When you curse what others believe to be holy, then don't be surprised when they curse what you believe to be holy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying clearly, don't insult the beliefs of other people. It doesn't mean you agree with them. It doesn't mean you merge with these beliefs. No, you preserve your beliefs, but you don't go to the level of insult. Imam Ali alayhi salam also, we remember one of the beautiful stories that are mentioned in Nahj al-Balagha, which is a principle that actually should guide our lives. That it is narrated that he passed by people from his army during the time of war or conflict with Muawiyah, the army of Sham. And he heard people what? Insulting. From his army, people insulting people from the other army. And Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen would say, إِنِّي أَكْرَهُ لَكُمْ أَن تَكُونُوا سَبَّابِينَ. I hate it for you to be cursing people. I hate it for you to be insulters. No, it doesn't befit you. It doesn't befit a mu'min. But if you describe their deeds and mention their condition, mention the wrong they're doing, it would be more correct in speech and more complete in making the argument against them. If you want to strengthen your argument against your opponent, insulting doesn't help you. Mention what happened. Mention the facts. And the facts, they point to who is right and who is wrong. People will be able to make judgments and understand. Imam Ali is saying this is more eloquent, it's more fruitful, that you describe what they're doing. You describe the wrong they are doing. You don't have to insult. And you said instead of cursing them, you would say, "Oh God, protect our blood and their blood." Pray to God to show concern for them. Pray to God for their guidance, basically. That's a better use of your energy. And say, instead of cursing them, "Oh God, protect our blood and their blood, and set right what is between us and them, and guide them from their misguidance until the truth is made or is known to whomsoever is ignorant of it, and until he refrains from transgression and aggression, whoever indulges in it." Imam Ali alayhi salam is saying, what really is the aim behind our interactions with people whom we're differing with? And here it's a context of war, essentially. The idea is not that we fight each other. The idea is that truth is made manifest, and insulting the beliefs of others doesn't make truth manifest easily in this sense. It maybe pushes people away from the way of truth. So when we discuss matters that are sensitive, matters that maybe other people deem to be sacred and holy and matter of respect, we need to be sensitive, especially when it is facing those people who are hearing us, especially on the minbar. We need to make sure that we discuss it sensitively and discuss it, not to hide it, not to hide from it. No, establish, acknowledge the difference and discuss it in a way that is befitting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah." Allah says to the messenger of God, invite to the way of your Lord with the hikmah. Some explain hikmah or this wisdom as the right approach. There is right methods, there are right approaches to speak to people so that you invite them to the way of God. You can't say to the person, "Oh, you who are, for example, a bad person, or you who are infidel, come to the path of God." That doesn't work. There needs to be an approach that makes people's heart lean and attracted to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. So this is the first introduction I thought to start with. The second is that every science, every field of science has its own methodologies that are used in it. And if you use the wrong methodology in that science, then something is wrong. Then you won't reach the right conclusions. For example, empirical sciences, they require empirical tools, experimentation. There's a certain way that you engage with that science. Rational sciences, philosophy, logic, they rely on rational tools, rational argumentation, right? Thinking, logic. You can't mix, or you can't use methods or approaches or methodologies that are wrong for a certain science. I'll give examples. I'll give examples to make it clear, inshallah. In the field of biology, so what do we study in biology? We study living things, right? Humans, animals, plants, their environment. Is it right to say, well, look, I have a certain hypothesis. I want to see, for example, how this cell behaves in that environment. So how do I go about studying that? Do I go, for example, and ask people's opinions? Like, do I go to a certain mosque and see what people think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And then I kind of compromise, or I kind of combine all these opinions, and then I think and come up with a certain theory and say, yeah, this is then how the cell works or lives in that environment. Is that a right methodology? Is that a right approach? Obviously, it's a wrong approach, right? Do I, for example, come and say that I want to apply mathematical equations and I want to think about mathematical equations that describe, for example, the behavior of this cell without any observation, without any experimentation? It doesn't work. Because that field of science, when you say biology, it has its own tools if you want to reach certain conclusions. You go and you experiment and you observe, and you have to respect these methodologies. You can't, for example, go and say, well, a narration says that the number of ribs of the male are less than the number of ribs of the female, because the narration says so. Well, that's not the field of the narration, my brother and sister. That's not the field of, for example, Imam said so, and this is mentioned in this book. It's a scientific, it's a biological hypothesis that requires a certain methodology. You can't say, for example, Earth is flat because certain spiritual person said so, assuming such a narration exists, right? That's a matter, and that is another matter. So you need to make sure that the topic that you're studying, the topic that you are involving or engaging with, that field of science, you apply the right methodologies. That's an example. Other examples, cosmology, the space, the sky, the heavens, okay? What kind of methodologies do we need to apply? For example, to understand how to describe, let's say, the sky or to describe space. What do we say? A great philosopher, a great thinker, for example, if he says, well, I sit in my room and I'll try to think, right? I'll lock myself inside, I'll try to think and theorize about how the space is made of, or what the space is made of, or what this planet is made of. And therefore, for example, this planet, Jupiter, has water. Why? Because I reflected. You see where the fallacy here is, right? It doesn't work. And then you had theories by some philosophers saying what? Saying that the heavens or the sky or space is a certain physical body that does not accept to be penetrated. Can never be penetrated. The sky can never be penetrated. And can never be joined together again. And some Muslims in the past, they had a dilemma. Well, okay, if philosophers say so, how was the Prophet, for example, how did he ascend, assuming that a physical ascension? So they had an issue combining both. Right? Wrong methodology. Applying a wrong methodology leading to the wrong results. Maybe later someone who is not maybe as a great of a thinker as that philosopher is, but chooses to go with the right methodology and then discovers equations or discovers some discoveries that allow now airplanes to fly through the sky, proving that, yes, the sky can be penetrated left and right. Right methodology for the right sciences. Another example is history. History, when you study history, what are the methods that you apply to study history? Do I do experimentation? If I want to say, for example, I want to find out what happened with that group of community or people 500 years ago. So I say, well, okay, let me then gather 5 people today, put them in a similar environment and see how they behave. And then I say, therefore, that's how they behaved 500 years ago. Is that a right methodology? That's not the right way to study history. That's not the right way to reach historical conclusion. Do I go to a book of narrations of hadith to say, for example, that, well, this happened or didn't happen? Because this happens sometimes. You go to a person, let's say from a Sunni school of thought, and the Shia, we have that as well. You say, this event so-and-so happened. He says, no, Bukhari didn't mention it, so it didn't happen. Well, says who that Bukhari is a historian? That's number one. Says who that he was interested in collecting historical records? Says who that he was an unbiased historian if he were? Says who that he collected everything that in that book, everything that he knew. He knew tens of thousands of narrations, yet he collected 7,500 and something narrations in the Bukhari book. Bukhari, or the Sahih of Bukhari, is one of the most prominent collections of hadith according to our brothers and sisters of the Sunni Islam. Okay? But if you also remove the repetitions, there is only maybe 2,500 narrations in Bukhari. Is all the history of Islam summarized in these narrations? Or Muslim, Sahih Muslim, for example, the other book, if you also condense it, it's 3,000 narrations. So that's total of 5,500 narrations. So is this a comprehensive collection of the history of Islam, for example, or the history of that period of time? Methodological fallacy. So these people, they use the wrong method. The one who is asking the person to bring evidence from Bukhari is wrong, and the person who tries to defend is also wrong. In Kafi, the same thing we have. Did this event happen? For example, you would say, no, Kafi didn't mention it. There wasn't for example, a chain of narrators of, Imamis, Shias, followers of Ahlul Bayt, all of them who have narrated from, such that they are all, for example, honest, and they are all udul, they are all pious, and they are all having great memories, right? So I can't rely on that narration to report a historical fact. That's wrong. Maybe you use the science of hadith and rijal to validate a narration if you are able to derive a fiqhi ruling from it, possibly. But to reach a conclusion on a historical fact, you rely on, for example, books of hadiths, that's not the right methodology. I hope that is clear. When you go and discuss history, one of the methods to actually validate or reach a certain conclusion about a historical incident, one of the methods that are used is called the method of gathering the evidence or gathering pieces of evidence. What do we mean? Sometimes you don't have a very clear record of history about a certain event, very clear and very reliable, but you have different pieces of context or evidence that you try to collect them in order to increase your surety or certainty about the possibility of that event happening. If you consider each of these pieces of evidence in isolation, maybe the probability would be low. But if you combine them together and you kind of cross validate them together, then you'd be able to be kind of more certain that yes, likely it happened. For example, if we say, let's say there was a girl, 18-year-old young lady, victim, who died, perhaps killed, and her body was lost. Okay? So you, as a forensic investigator, what do you do first? What do? You start collecting some evidence from the context. For example, did she have people whom she disputed with before she disappeared, before she died? Did she have enemies? Did anyone threaten her before she died? For example, who was the last person who saw her? Who had interest in her missing or in killing her? Who would be benefiting more? Who would be, for example, harmed because of her existence? Who was bothered by her? Things like that. So you start asking these questions. If you ask one of these in isolation, it gives you maybe an answer, but you wouldn't be really sure. The probability would be low. But when you combine them together and you see that all these pieces of evidence are directing towards certain direction, then you're more sure that this actually has happened. That this person, for example, could have participated or maybe participated in, for example, her disappearance. Do you see where I'm going? Do you see my point? Okay? Gathering evidence. This is this methodology. So to apply it, let's talk about the event or the incident of the attack on the house of Lady Fatima alayha salam. Okay? So let's say now we have a hypothesis. We're saying, look, we want to see in history. We hear that there was a person, X, for example, who participated on the attack, on the exposure of the house of Lady Fatima alayha salam. And we want to see, is that possible or is that not? In Bukhari, it's not mentioned. Can we say, therefore, it didn't happen? No, again, because Bukhari is not a book of history. It's not a record of history. So we go and try to collect pieces of evidence. Okay? So what kind of pieces of evidence that we can collect? So let's say, considering this person X, considering this person, this man, we go and ask, okay, what were the traits or the characters of this man or this person? What was his akhlaq? Okay? And then we read, for example, something like he was known to be rough and tough. He was known to be like that. And for example, once that he called for a lady who was pregnant. And that lady, out of fear, so he was known to be someone to be feared. And out of fear, she miscarried on the way. And later he asked people, what should we do? They said, it's her fault. It's not your fault. So there's no diya. You shouldn't pay anything. Amir al-Mu'mineen would tell him, no, you should pay a diya because you frightened her. You caused her to miscarry the baby. So there's this kind of trait of a character. We read, for example, other indicators that say, well, when he would come to a gathering, he would come frowning. And when he would leave frowning. Or, for example, that he was high-tempered. So we collect these kind of reports to give us a certain idea about what characteristics this person had. To say, for example, did he attack? Was he participating in the attack on the house of Fatima or was he not? Okay? So this is one class of, let's say, evidence that we try to collect. Another class of evidence is, okay, this person, in similar situations with his opponents, what behaviors did he display? In behavior or in situations of tension, what behaviors did he display? Was he, for example, someone who was peaceful, trying to resolve the conflict? Or was he someone who was, for example, high tempered? So what kind of thing? So that we say, well, this person, no, he couldn't have done what these reports say that he has done to the house of Fatima. Or no, he might have actually done it. Or no, he has actually done it. So one story that we know that was reported is that his sister, at the early times of Islam, she joined Islam before he joined Islam. His sister joined Islam with her husband in secret. And when he learned, he returned to the house with rage. With rage. And his son-in-law reportedly said, look, wait, maybe they are right. Maybe Islam is right. Maybe, the message of Muhammad is right. Take it easy on them. And what he did actually was that this person, he stepped on his son-in-law and he beat him so hard, as the reports say. He would step on him and he would beat him so hard. And then he would smack his sister until her face would bleed. Brothers, sisters, I'm not here again to insult. I'm not here to justify or criticize. Someone might justify, by the way. Someone might justify, or someone might criticize. That's not my concern now. My concern now is to try to collect these pieces of evidence to see, do we have a plausible case of that actually this person has participated in this attack or not? Is it something that he could have done or not? Someone might say, well, this report that you're saying now, it happened before Islam. And then he joined Islam and Allah forgives. I have no problem with that. My concern now is not whether God forgave or not. The characteristics and the traits of that personality, did it change after Islam or did it not? Maybe Allah forgave him. That's with Allah. With Islam, Allah forgives the past. Okay, good, Qabul, I accept. But what I'm talking about here is the traits, the characteristics, the akhlaq. So, after Islam also, there are reports that say when the Prophet ﷺ left this world and people would say, for example, the Prophet died and he would be very outraged, he would be, very full in rage with people. Don't say that he died. Actually, he didn't die. And he will return and cut off the hands and the feet of all those who are saying that he died. Although the Quran actually said that, yes, he could die. أَفَإِن مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ انقلبتم على أعقابكم. Muhammad could die. So why are you so pushing people not to say that? And he would actually beat up those people who would say Muhammad died. So these are reports that we also read about this character. Another is that, for example, he broke the sword of Zubayr. Zubayr, the companion of the Prophet. So he broke the sword around that incident. Another is that he pushed the chest of Miqdad, also the companion. So these kind of events or these kind of displays or these kind of behaviors or displayed behaviors, these are the things that we see. And these allow us to form a certain, let's say, degree of surety about the possibility or not that the incident happened on. Another report says that one day he broke the nose of Al-Hubab ibn al-Mundhir at the time of the Prophet, apparently. So apparently he smacked him and he broke his nose. That Hubab bin Mundhir, he was present in Saqifa. Another report that in Saqifa, he kicked and he stepped on Sa'ad bin Ubadah, the leader of the Khazraj. The leader of the Khazraj. So this is also a report. And later, this Sa'ad bin Ubadah was killed. And it was said that, well, the jinn actually killed him. And they kind of composed a couple of verses in Arabic to say that these are the jinn who killed him. And they said these two verses of poetry. لقد قتلنا سيد الخزرج سعد بن عبادة بسهمين فلم تخطئ فؤاده. Something like that. Like, we have striken 2 arrows to the heart of Sa'ad bin Ubadah and we'll kill him. And that was the jinn that did it. So, anyway, what I'm trying to do here is not to justify or to criticize. I'm trying to, again, display these or collect these pieces of evidence so that we are able to derive a certain conclusion about a certain event in history. So this is another class of pieces of evidence that we could gather. Another class of pieces of evidence is who is narrating these reports? Who is narrating these reports? If these reports are being narrated by his opponents, then there might be a certain bias there that we say, well, okay, it's less plausible. because of a certain intent against him. But if people who support him, if people who love him, who follow him, for example, they report these reports, then we say, well, these are likely to be authentic. These are likely to be correct. So this is, they become kind of more plausible and less doubtful. And we see in one of the books by Abd al-Zahra Mahdi, the title is Al-Hujumu ala Bayti Fatima, Attacking the House of Fatima. So this author, he dedicates maybe 60 pages listing more than 80 scholars, more than 80 people who actually acknowledge that this person participated in this event surrounding the house of Fatima, exposing the house of Fatima, and trying to raid and actually raiding the house of Fatima. Some of these is Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah, he's one of the proto-Salafi scholars and was very, very known of his hatred towards the Shia, and his position towards the Ahlul Bayt is also known and extreme. Ibn Taymiyyah also in his Minhaj al-Sunnah, in his book, he says, وَنَحْنُ نَعْلَمُ يَقِينًا. We know for certain that a person A did not harm Ali and Al-Zubayr on that day. Nor did he harm Sa'ad bin Ubadah, who had failed to pledge allegiance to him from the beginning and the end. The most that can be said is that he raided the house to see if there was any of God's wealth in the house of Fatima. إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت. The house of those whom Allah has purified, or Allah said, I am willing to purify you from any evil, from any impurity. So this person is raiding the house to see if there was any of God's wealth in it that he would distribute and give to its rightful owners. Apparently, Fatima and Ali, they're collecting money that does not belong to them. If Fatima salamullahi alayha had money, had wealth in the house, that would be something that maybe was given to her by the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Take it to the rightful owners. If Fatima salamullahi alayha had money and had wealth in that house, you would observe the manners, you would maybe send a delegation, you would send ladies, you would knock on the door. There is ways of doing it, especially to the house that the Messenger of God sallallahu alaihi wasallam respected so much. It is narrated that for 6 months or 9 months, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would stand by that door and would recite these verses. إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت. And then Ibn Taymiyyah continues in his book. He says, then he saw that if he had left it for them, it would have been dismissed. So it would have been allowed. So the authority would have been diminished. And it is permissible for him to give them from the spoils of war, basically. And as for harming them, no, that has never happened, and according to the consensus of the people of knowledge and the deen. And in a few instances, Ibn Taymiyyah actually claims consensus between scholars, but if you go and investigate, you realize, no, there's no consensus on what he's actually claiming. And that has happened in a few times, and those who have investigated, they can actually verify that. But this is what I thought to share today. A correction in the approach that we use in order to verify or make judgments about history. We need to make sure that we use the right methods, the right methodologies. We need to make sure that, for example, if a historical fact is being displayed to us, that this historical fact is actually using or is stated after using the right methods of history. And we, inshallah, or we established that one of these methods is the collection or the gathering of evidence, so that we have a certain level of certainty or certain level of surety about whether something happened or did not happen. Inshallah, next week we'll discuss on why does this matter? Why does it really matter that we know if this thing happened or didn't happen? What really influences us? How does it really affect us in our lives? السلام عليك يا سيدتي ومولاتي يا فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ممتحنة امتحنك الله الذي خلقك قبل أن يخلقك. Peace be upon you, or the one who was tested. You were tested by your Lord who created you before creating you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. صلوات.